Oh, here we go. My first attempt at a quick video blog while I've got 5 minutes peace and quiet. All the kids are off at school. The littlest one's just having her morning nap. Wow, what a start to the day. The bunnies escaped. That was interesting. Spent 20 minutes trying to coax them out from under the decking in the garden. But did manage to get everybody off to school on time without too much hassle this morning, has to be said. So that's a good start. So anyway, I wanted to do this little blog just to really talk about what's happened to us over the last 18 months and how that's impacted on us and our family. And I thought the best way to do that would be to start at the beginning and tell you all about what happened around Natalie and her disappearance and subsequent murder. So for me, the story kind of starts on Tuesday, the 3rd of May, and I got a phone call from my mum. I was part of my job. I had a small daycare setting, and I was on the school run. So I was sat in the school car park waiting to pick the children up. And my phone went, and it was my mum, which was quite a usual thing really, because we used to sit and have a quick 5-minute conversation before I went in to pick the kids up. And so my mum's on the phone. She was quite calm, to be honest, and she said, I'm really worried about Natalie. And I said, well, what do you mean you're worried about Natalie? And she said, well, I can't get hold of her. And which is it was very unusual, because even if you didn't get hold of her at that second, you would have been able to, speak to her later on in the day, or she would have texted you. There would have been something. So Mum proceeded to explain that she'd been ringing the house phone, she'd been ringing her mobile, which had now cut off, and that she had been to the house, and that Natalie's car was on the driveway, that Paul was home, which was odd in itself because he should have been at work. And when they asked where Natalie was, he was very cagey, wouldn't let them in the house, and said that she'd gone away for a few days to clear her head. So obviously my cousin was there, and he said, what, without her car, without her phone? It seems a bit odd. And so obviously my mum came away from there feeling even more concerned, and then I've obviously spoken to her on the phone, and I think at that point, after she told me that she'd been to the house and that the car was there and that her phone wasn't working, for me that was it was like, I can't even explain, it was just like lead hitting my stomach. I just, at that second, I knew that something terrible had happened, because everything about what my mum was telling me just didn't fit how Natalie was. No matter what was going on in life, we're a close family, and she would have told one of us. She would never ever have gone away and left the children, and just everything about it was just wrong. And I just remember saying to my mum at that point, Mum, you need to phone the police. Something's happened to her. He's done something to her. And I said, you need to ring, just put the phone down for me now, Mum, and just ring 999, and you need to call the police. And if you don't, I will. So my mum, obviously, I think she was worried about wasting people's time. And even though she knew that something was very wrong, I think it's just that, you can't quite believe what you're dealing with. So she phoned my brother, who he works with the police force down south, and she phoned him, and he said the same thing as me. Mum, everything about this is out of character for Natalie, and you just need to ring the police. And then, obviously, for those of you that have seen the documentary, that's the point at which you hear my mum's phone call when she phones 999. And then from there, it was a bit of a whirlwind, really. I remember coming home and saying to my daughter, you've got your cousin's mobile phone number. Can you ring her and see if you can get hold of her, because she might know where Natalie is. And trying to ring her phone, and her phone being dead, and then this terrible fear about where are the children, are they okay? We don't know where Natalie is. Are the children okay? And just all these things whizzing through your head. And so then we had, we kept trying all evening, just kept trying to phone all evening to contact her, it's vain hope, but I just knew. And then about 2 o'clock in the morning, I think it was, on the Wednesday, we had a visit from our local police force, and they came and did a search of our house to make sure Natalie wasn't here. And I know they went to my sister Kerry's house at the same time on the same day, and they did a search of her property as well to make sure she wasn't there. I don't think they believed, I think it's just a procedure. And obviously we were saying the same things, even though we live an hour away from each other, and we live, at that time we were living a few hundred miles away from Mum and Nat, that, we believed something was very wrong, and that there was a real issue here, and who we believed to be responsible for that. And then not long after those visits happened, obviously he was arrested. And I suppose the most telling bit for me were his words as he was put into the police car. "So have you found her then? Not, is she okay? What's going on? Have you found her then?" I think that says it all, really. And then that Wednesday, my sister and I packed, just quickly grabbed a bag of stuff and headed down to my mum's to help my mum, because my mum wasn't able to manage 3 children on her own, as well as dealing with the grief and shock of what was happening. And I just remember, and it's something that Kerry vividly remembers and talks about, is that phone conversation when we made the decision that we were going down to my mum's, and I actually don't remember saying it, but I said to my sister on the phone, and we were quite upset, and I just said to her, "Please drive carefully, I can't lose you as well." Which is, I don't actually remember saying it with Kerry. Obviously it's something that resonates with Kerry, and sort of thinking back on it now, I can imagine that the fear of losing somebody else now is terrible. So we went down to my mum's, and we were there for a few days, just trying to keep normality for the children, really, just trying to keep things as normal as possible. And then we went over to the Magistrates court at Milton Keynes, because Milton Keynes doesn't have a Crown Court. So just the way the system works, because it's such a serious offence, it has to go to the Crown Court, which was at Luton. So we had to go to the Magistrate Court on the Friday to watch him be remanded in custody, to be for that to be heard again on the Monday, for him to actually be charged with murder, because the Magistrates Courts are not able to do that. And I remember walking in to the room, and it's not a particularly big room, the Magistrates Court over at Milton Keynes, and him being stood not very far from us and looking completely different. It's odd, because Natty always said he had 2 faces. The side of him that everybody else saw, which was very charming and very well spoken, could sell ice to Eskimos, but then there was the side that obviously Natalie lived with, and it was suddenly like we were all seeing him for the first time. It was very odd, and he looked straight at me and he said, "I didn't kill her, I promise," and did the sign of a cross on him. And that moment, I just thought, oh my goodness, you're in this position, and even now you can't just admit what you've done and give everybody closure. You're gonna keep going with this until whenever. So the hearing was only a few minutes, and then we were out of that room. And we spoke to Simon Steele, who was the lead investigator on the case, and I can very clearly remember him having this conversation with us and saying, "You need to be prepared that actually we may never find Natalie, that I think we are probably dealing with what we call a nobody murder, because the search area if I remember rightly, was 500 square miles, which is just enormous. It's just enormous, and there's just no way that you can do that level of search for in that size of area. So, you know, he was very calm, and he was very clear with this. And I can remember actually saying at that point in that room, would it make any difference if I wrote a letter to him and asked him to, you know, please just tell us where she is, so that we can at least give her the dignity of a burial, and give Mum and the rest of us, you know, the closure that we need to be able to move on. And I can remember, you know, them being very clear and saying, you know, this type of person, it doesn't matter to them, and he'll never tell us. So that was quite difficult, because I came away, and I think it was one of the clips is, I can remember coming away from that and sitting in the car and thinking, well, if we're never able to have a funeral, and if we never actually know 110%, how do you move on? How do you grieve? How do you just get on with your life? You know, just with that constant nagging, lingering, but she could still be alive. She could be okay. She could be somewhere out there, and we just don't know. Yeah, so that was quite difficult. I can remember that quite vividly, that sort of fear of if the unknown, really. So yeah, then we had the weekend, and we just tried to keep things as normal as possible. Then on the Monday, we watched him be remanded at the Crown Court, and then we came home. I mean, at the Crown Court, it was quite difficult at the Crown Court, because we were in a sort of side room with our family liaison officers and some of the other members of the team that were investigating the case. And then we came out of that room, and Paul's family were across the courtroom, and I'd never met them before. I'd sort of heard about them, but I'd never actually met them before, and they were kind of stood the other side of the room. And it must have been incredibly difficult for them as well, because, you know, I mean, I just don't even know how you're supposed to feel about something like that, being told that your son's committed murder. I don't know how you deal with that. And they were kind of looking at us, and me being me, I just kind of said to my sister, oh, look, this is ridiculous. We haven't done anything wrong. They haven't done anything wrong. Let's just go over and speak to them. So I walked across and I introduced myself, and we spoke to them, and we just reassured them that, you know, the children and the cat and the dog were fine, and that, you know, everyone was managing as best they can in this situation. And I did think it was really sad that his stepdad told us that actually they only found out that he'd even been arrested because it came up on Sky News. I mean, it must have been such a shock for them to turn his television on, and suddenly your son's face is plastered all over the television screen saying he's been accused of murder. I mean, what a terrible way to find out. So that was quite shocking. But again, it was a very short hearing, and I remember his one of his sisters sitting in front of me and crying and you know, being very upset. And just as I suppose it was like an instant reaction, I just put my hand on her shoulder and said, "It will be okay. You know, it will be okay." And again, it was one of those things that at the time I didn't really think that much of it, but obviously it was something that that Paul had seen from where he was sitting in the dock. And since this has all happened, he has written a few letters to myself and my sister. And I will read those out in a later blog, so you can hear some of the things that he said. But he did mention that in one of the letters that he'd seen me, you know, comfort his sister. But I didn't do it for him. I did it because his sister's not responsible for his actions, and the family have been affected in the same way that we have. You know, they've lost somebody as well. Natalie was part of their family as well. They treated her the same way that we would have treated any one of them in the reverse situation. So yeah, so that was quite odd. But then on straight after the hearing, we came home and tried to settle into life as best you can when you suddenly go from 4 children to 6 children and a cat, which I have to say my husband was not impressed at. He took everything in his stride, God love him. He just takes it on the chin and he just cracks on with it. But the cat he was traumatised by. He's not a cat fan, and I hadn't mentioned that I was bringing the cat back, and I just sort of dropped it into the conversation that we needed cat litter and a litter tray, and he went, "What do you mean we need cat litter and a litter tray? I don't want a bloody cat." Yeah, so never mind the fact that I was bringing home 2 extra children, it was the cat that was the issue. And they still love to hate each other. But I will dig out the letters, and I will look to read those out to you at a later date. So thank you, that's today's blog.